Welcome, and thank you for coming. My name is Jacqueline Pollauf, and I'm so happy that you've joined me today for this online concert. This is the last concert in my spring series, so it's really a pleasure to be presenting the final concert of the series for you. And as usual, the program will last around 30 minutes. All of the titles and composers are listed below in the description, but of course I will also announce it as I go along and share a few thoughts about each piece and composer. If you have any questions throughout the program, feel free to post them in the chat, which is open, and then I will answer them in the same way. And today I'm going to be playing works by 4 different composers, and the theme that I've chosen to explore today is Lamentations, looking at things that are a bit sad and somber within music. And although this is a theme that seems like it could be a little bit depressing, I think actually the works are really beautiful, and the emotions are more complex than just straight sadness. So hopefully it will still be quite enjoyable with that theme. I'm going to start with a piece called Lamento, written by Alphonse Hasselmans. And Hasselmans lived from 1845 to 1912. He was born in Belgium, but spent most of his life living and working in Paris. And he was himself a harpist as well as a composer and a teacher of the harp at the Paris Conservatory. He wrote many character sketches for the harp within his compositional output. And I've actually done an entire program of just his works before. This piece that I'm going to play today is a bit unusual. I would say it is certainly not one of his most often performed pieces, but I always enjoyed the chance of learning some different pieces by Hasselmans and expanding what I play by him. So you'll hear that it has 4 sections to the piece. It starts with a section with low octaves and these very dramatic rolled chords up high in the harp. And from there, the second section is all arpeggios. It moves into a major key for this, and the hands are trading off the arpeggios with the melody at the top throughout that section. And then the third section of the piece it's a bit faster, more agitated, and the arpeggios in the right hand, and then there's octaves throughout in the left hand. And this leads into the final section of the piece, which is a return of the opening, so the very dramatic low octaves and rolled chords to finish it off. So I hope you enjoy Lamento by Alphonse Hasselmans. Now I'll be playing Gymnopedie number 1 by Erik Satie, my own transcription. And Erik Satie was a French composer. He lived from 1866 to 1925, and he studied at the Paris Conservatory, like so many others. But one interesting point in his biography is that he was not a successful student at the conservatory. For myself, sometimes when I'm reading these biographies of musicians, it can be a bit intimidating to read about all their many accomplishments, and many of them were child prodigies, and they did so much. But Satie was certainly not in that category. Instead, he was described as a lazy student at the conservatory, and he did not take a diploma or finish with any sort of degree of success there. And after this, he went on to live a very bohemian life, kind of in all senses. He was friends with various Impressionist composers like Debussy and Ravel and Roussel, although sometimes he had trouble maintaining friendships. He earned a living for a while playing in cafes and then eventually playing cabaret music. And it was only much later in his life that he was able to make a living as a composer and had regular commissions coming in. He also wrote articles and things for various publications. Some composers and musicians who do this have a really direct, I guess you would say, kind of pairing with their work. So many of them write as music critics. But Satie wrote in a much broader sense about all kinds of musings and thoughts on life and things. Much like his life, his music is a bit quirky, frequently a bit unexpected. And the piece that I'm going to play today is one of his most famous works, the Gymnopedie number 1. I think it's the kind of piece where, for a lot of people, when you hear it, you'll go, oh, that one, I know that one, even if you don't necessarily know the title right off. And he wrote it quite early in his career. It was one of his early works, early compositional works. It's really a beautiful piece. Throughout it, you'll hear some interesting things. It's kind of deceptively simple. So the accompaniment is just low notes with chords, almost with the feel of kind of a very slow waltz. So you hear go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, throughout like that. And the melody just sort of floats above. It's quite short, but throughout it, the harmonies always are just a little bit, I guess, kind of not what's expected. Satie likes to leave some of his harmonies unresolved, a bit sort of floating in the air. And he has the piece marked to be slow and sad, or slow and a bit painful. And for me, this really kind of sums up today's theme, because I think this is such a beautiful piece. But there is also that sadness to it. It's kind of this blending of the different emotions, a lot of maybe wistfulness to it, and both some happiness and some sadness all kind of wound together. So here is my transcription of Gymnopedie number 1 by Erik Satie. Next, I'm going to play a set of 2 pieces written by Betty Jackson King, who was an American musician and composer who lived from 1928 to 1994. And King grew up in Chicago. She studied at a variety of music schools, including one right here in Baltimore, the Peabody Conservatory, which I also attended. And she was passionate as a music educator and a church musician. She herself was a vocalist and a choral conductor, so many of her compositions were written for chorus. I think King's biography is somewhat similar to that of Florence Price's, another Black woman American composer, but Price is a bit better known, so I wanted to thank harpist Mallory McHenry for introducing me to Betty Jackson King and her music. And the 2 pieces that I'm going to play were originally written for solo piano. They come up from a suite called the 4 Seasonal Sketches, so each of the 4 pieces is about a different season of the year. I'll be playing the Summer Interlude and the Autumn Dance. And for me, the Summer Interlude has kind of a lush feel. It is a slow piece, starting with an accompaniment in the left hand that features a lot of 7th chords, so a bit of a jazzy sound, and then the melody on top of that. And that whole section kind of moves through various twists and turns and builds to a second section that's a bit dreamier and more floating, a bit of a contrast, or maybe not a contrast, maybe more of an evolution from the first section. And the second section has a lot of complex harmonies. There are many pedal changes for all of the chromaticism throughout that. And then the whole piece builds to a high point before returning to the first section. And for me, this Summer Interlude really evokes the feeling of kind of a hot, humid summer night. Then the Autumn Dance has a much different feel. Throughout it, there is a constant bass line, 4 notes that kind of underpin the entire piece, with the melody on top of that, and a bit of ebb and flowing through bigger and more dramatic sections and more simplicity. So these are both my own transcriptions, and I wanted to play these 2 pieces today, partly because they fit in with the theme, especially the complexity of emotion and kind of combination of different emotions that I was just talking about with the Satie. But I also wanted to play them because I'll be playing these works next month at the American Harp Society's Summer Institute, which is taking place this year in Los Angeles, California. So these 2 pieces will be part of a program I'm doing of suites by women composers there. So here is the Summer Interlude and the Autumn Dance by Betty Jackson King. I wanted to end today with a piece by Marius Flothuis, a Dutch composer who lived from 1914 to 2001. And Flothuis was a composer, a musicologist, and a music critic. A big area of interest for him actually was Mozart. He was a Mozart expert and did a lot of work with that. Among other things, he actually wrote a set of cadenzas for Mozart's flute and harp concerto that I think are quite popular with performers. He composed a lot for the harp. Interestingly, he was a self-taught composer, and his compositional output includes many chamber works that involve harp, and also a fair number of solo works for harp, or works for multiple harps. So he really seemed to have an affinity for the instrument. I'm going to play what's probably his best-known harp work called Pour le tombeau d'Orphée, translated to For the Tomb of Orpheus, and I think it's referencing the Orpheus and Eurydice myth. And this is probably his best-known work for harp. It was written in 1950, and the piece has a very somber feel to it. It's written in 5 sections, so you'll hear that it starts with this pattern of low octaves and low chords and harmonics in the harp that really set the mood for that very kind of somber and almost ominous feel to the piece. And once that mood is set, we hear the first full section, which continues that pattern of really using the low register of the harp, but kind of weaves a melody into that as well. Then there's a bit of an interruption with the second section. Everything shifts just a little bit. So at first it's much lighter and simpler, just a single line of notes. And then we hear the melody with these running arpeggios underneath for this short kind of interruptive section. The third section is a return of the first section, but Flothuis makes a change in it that I find really interesting. Initially, this material is written in the time signature of 3/4, which is quite straightforward. But when it comes back, he writes it in 5/8. So the whole thing has just this like slight off-kilter feel to it. Then the fourth section is quite different from anything else. The entire section is comprised of harmonics in the left hand and accompanying glissandos in the right hand. So it's really a lot, I guess a bit more sparse than the surrounding sections. There's less going on. And the glissandos keep changing what scales they're using. So there's a lot of pedals throughout that section. And then the final section brings back the material from the first and third sections. But again, Flothuis changes the time signature. This time he writes it in 8/8 and specifies that it's a group of 2/8 notes, 3/8 notes, and 3/8 notes. So again, there's this feeling of everything just being not quite settled. So I think this is really a beautiful and unusual work for the harp. I hope you enjoy Flothuis's For the Tomb of Orpheus. Thank you all again for coming. I really enjoyed putting together and performing today's program. And there's information below in the description about how to make a contribution through either PayPal or Venmo, and you can just copy and paste that info. As I mentioned, today is the last concert in my spring concert series. I will be in touch about future plans. I'm not quite sure what those will look like. I'm still debating about whether or not I'd like to continue this particular concert series in this format in the fall. But whether or not I do that, there will certainly be many types of performances and videos and all sorts of things happening. So information about everything is always available through my website. And then there's also my email newsletter that I send out a couple of times a month with updates about everything. So thanks again to everyone for coming, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.